So Kuma becomes yet another data plane within the full cycle service control platform. And I would like to invite on stage Geoff Townsend, VP of Engineering of Kong, to bring you along to the next steps of the journey. Welcome, Geoff.
All right. Who wants to see some products today? Yeah? Yeah. All right. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you guys today about what we've been doing at Kong over the course of the last year. We've taken a lot of feedback from you, from our customers, from our peers in the industry, and from our community about the types of things that you'd like to see in the product. And so I'm very, very excited and pumped to show you some of the products and features that we're going to be unveiling today at Kong Summit. But I also want to talk a little bit about a three-headed dragon that we're going to end up finding along the way. So let's get started. You are likely an engineering team at a successful company. Now, I know that sounds a little bit silly to say, but we all work someplace that pays the bills. We strive to bring value to our customers, and we've probably acquired some technology along the way. Chances are, more likely than not, you've acquired quite a bit of technology along the way. And in fact, you may have at one point said to yourself, man, we have all the things. We have many different protocols, lots of different platforms. We deploy on lots of different technologies, and we may even have more than one cloud. And to make things even more interesting, we just had Chris up here. New technologies are coming in all the time. If you look at the growth of the CNCF from 2017 to 2019, it's a massive explosion of technologies that could end up coming into your company in the next couple of years. But more importantly than that, you also have legacy technologies, which you may or may not have felt at some point like this about. And whether it be because they're too expensive to migrate, the ROI is not good enough to do it, or more likely than not, the migration period is a multi-year journey, it may sometimes feel like this. And so, a good example of this is we have a very large banking customer that was quoted $25 million to move one of their back-end services, one back-end service, from the legacy technology to APIs. And the CTO, being a very smart person, said, well, okay, that number doesn't scare me, but what do I get at the end of this journey? What do I get when I pop out the other end of this tunnel? And they said, well, you'll get the same exact functionality, except now it'll be APIs. Right? So being a very smart person, obviously, they found other ways to go through the migration pattern. So the thing I'm trying to get you to see is that you're going to end up having both new technology as you roll it out, and you're also going to be migrating old technology. You're going to be changing the engines on the airplane while the airplane is in flight. And the reason why is because the services that you already built and the services that you're building next are how your customers get value. Right? And so I think the thing that I'm trying to get you to come along with me here on is the fact that maybe we shouldn't be freaking out about having all the things. Maybe that's, in fact, the way to be successful in doing the digital transformation that we all hope to try to do. Maybe what we really should be doing is looking for tools that are going to allow us to have those systems, to monitor them successfully so that we can jump that chasm and get to the next part of our technical journey that we're going on. McKinsey did a study on digital transformations and who is successful. And they found that companies that successfully jumped the divide deployed much more technology than those that didn't. In fact, they found that 80% plus of those who were successful deployed more than one mobile strategy, more than one web technology, and likely more than one cloud. So this is where I wanted to talk about the three-headed dragon that we talked about before. The jump to success in the technical transformation is by agnosticism. And there's sort of three axes in which you need to be agnostic if you really want to beat this beast. and cut all 3 heads off. And so I'll go through those right now. First one is protocol. Your system should talk the language they need to talk to do what you want them to do. REST is awesome, but there are times when you're going to want a compressed format like gRPC that's going to save you data on the wire. Or maybe you want to wield the power of GraphQL to do much more extensive queries with much less effort. Your tool should be able to handle those protocols and give you the visibility into them. 2, deployment pattern. You're likely going to deploy on multiple different systems and multiple different methods. You could use Kubernetes. The world is proliferated with Kubernetes at the point, but you're going to still have some legacy systems on hardware, and you're probably going to end up having some VMs for a while. And 3, making sure that you can handle multi-cloud. In the next 5 years, the majority of you will end up having more than one cloud provider at some point. So what I really hope to get you to come along with me on is this concept of digital transformations succeed by bringing your own technology. And so, without further ado, I'd like to show you the first product suite that will help you lop off one of those dragon's heads, Kong Studio. So, Kong Studio is built on Insomnia, continuing our open source DNA. But one thing I would like to direct you to that's slightly different is we actually now have this nifty menu up on the left-hand side of the product. And you can see we have several panels. The top is the editing panel, then we have the testing panel, and then we have the results panel. As you can see here, we are editing an OpenAPI spec right in the product. And there's a menu over here, and if we extend the paths section of that menu, you can see that we can jump to any endpoint inside of that file and start editing to our heart's content. And you can also see as you're editing, the menu on the side updates in real time, and you can continue and save, and now you have your spec in whatever format you'd like. So let's say we're happy with our spec, and we're interested in testing it now. Well, we can do that right inside the application. Up on the top right-hand corner, I'll point you to the testing button. If we go ahead and do that, you'll see we flip over to the testing tab, and Studio has built queries for every single one of the endpoints inside of that file. As Guanlun just showed you a second ago, the base URL for these requests has also been automatically sucked out of the file and set up so that you can make successful queries against these endpoints right out of the box. So, we've now edited an OpenAPI spec file. We've now tested that backend file. Let's go ahead and go back to the editing tab, and I'll direct your attention to the deploy button. Let's go ahead and deploy this spec to Kong straight out of Studio. As you can see, we now end up in the Services tab of Kong with all of our routes and services pre-configured, all straight from inside of Kong Studio. And with that, we've completed the first station in the pre-production part of the full service lifecycle. I'd like to show you the next product that we're going to show off today. What you may or may not know about Kong is that we run a service called Mockbin. Mockbin is an open source project and also a cloud service that allows you to do arbitrary marking of RESTful backends so that you can test them with your application. We thought it would be pretty nifty if we went ahead and integrated that with Studio and with Kong so that you could execute the full pre-production lifecycle. We'll illustrate a bit of what we can do today, which is we can create ourselves a RESTful endpoint inside of, we can put in any kind of arbitrary data we'd like and go ahead and push that up to push to Mockbin. You get this nifty ID, which you can then use to query that same RESTful endpoint and go ahead and retrieve whatever data you've decided to put in there, arbitrary RESTful end. So that's what you have today inside Mockbin. But what I'd like to talk to you about in V2 is basic GraphQL support inside of Mockbin. As you can see in our trusty friend Studio, which we're using a lot today, you can pick a JSON blob of your choice that has the data that you'd eventually like to query in whatever shape you'd end up like to query it. You can go ahead and push this up to Mockbin. Again, you get an ID so that you can then query the data that you pushed up, because multiple users may be using the backend. And now you can make queries to that JSON blob and get data that's auto-generated back in whatever shape you'd like. In fact, What's even cooler is that Studio is smart enough to pull the schema down from mockbin, and it can give you indications about what types of data is available for you to query so that you can shape whatever data you'd like. As you can see, now we get arbitrary data back in whatever shape we'd like to start testing and mocking our GraphQL endpoints. And that's GraphQL inside of mockbin. And with that, we've done the first couple of circles here on the pre-production part of the lifecycle. Now, to show you how serious we are about GraphQL, we have a sister company here in the Bay Area named Apollo, and we have a guest speaker here who I'm very proud to announce, the co-founder and CTO of Apollo. Welcome Matt to the stage.
Thanks.
There you go.
Morning, everyone. My name is Matt DeBergalis. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Apollo. We're also an open source business built around GraphQL. GraphQL has had an astonishing rise in popularity. A recent survey showed north of 80% of JavaScript developers are using or want to learn GraphQL to build their applications. And our open source implementation of GraphQL, just one of many, has over 1 million downloads a week by developers building apps. Like Kong, we're in the digital transformation business. Consider a travel booking application. Today, customers expect a rich experience connected to a wealth of data. So on just one screen, we have everything from property details to real-time pricing to real-time offers to user reviews, and so on and so on and so forth. And the days of all that data being in one database or one API are long gone. That data is coming from a wealth of different systems, built in different technologies, potentially the product of acquisitions. There's nothing common between them. And on top of that, we have this rise of platforms. So that kind of experience needs to be brought to users, whether they're on desktop or mobile web or native mobile or IoT or voice or whatever's coming next month. And what we end up with is this M by N problem, right? We've got something about each product that we want to create connected to each piece of data that we need to bring to our users. And the complexity of orchestrating how all that data is going to move and the precise shape and all the details are what product engineers actually spend most of their time doing instead of building the user experience that provides all the value. So the solution is what we call a data graph, a layer that sits between your services and your applications. And it's a declarative layer, so instead of writing code to express what kind of data we want in each of these products, we write queries and we write schemas. And the layer in the middle functions almost like a marketplace, an Amazon Prime for your data. So as a developer, I don't have to know precisely which service each piece of data I might want is coming from. And there's a decoupling so that as the services change, I'm isolated from the details of that. And I can focus on just describing in a very natural form, as Geoff showed, what data I need and how I want it organized to match the shape of my product. That's GraphQL. And the example I showed you isn't a hypothetical. If you book travel on Expedia today, you're using a data graph to pull all that data to your browser, to your phone, or whatever other device you might use. Hundreds of companies have adopted that pattern. GitHub, Facebook, Audi, when they launched their e-tron car, all building on top of a data graph instead of a set of fixed APIs. And that allows them phenomenally faster software development and a richer user experience. When I talk to teams using GraphQL, the message that we often hear is how transformative it is, not just for their development, but the whole life cycle of building and maintaining applications, the team structure, the way to think about APIs. As just one example, we're used to thinking about APIs as these fixed ideas. Versions change very slowly, and when they do change, it's a really big deal. But with GraphQL, we push multiple versions of a schema a day. The API becomes a product itself that continuously evolves the way our products do. And so, as teams go through this process, what's come up over and again is, what's this mean for how I run my data graph? What does this mean operationally? And how do I think about that product? And how do I think about how it connects to everything else? So an infrastructure-centric view of a data graph might look something more like this, where the graph and its implementation is just one of many components in a modern piece of infrastructure. And all the questions that have come up earlier around transport, around policy, around discovery, those are questions that are as applicable to the graph as they are to each of the services. In fact, the graph elevates the value of those services because it allows developers to describe what they need, and it allows those services to be reachable by product teams all across the organization. And so it puts more and more pressure and more emphasis on the properties of those wires, the connectivity and the policy that you can build on top of that. And so that's why I'm so excited about the partnership that Apollo and Kong have now. Teams are able to develop this kind of software dramatically faster, integrate with the infrastructure that they already have, and take advantage of all these developments that you're hearing about today from Kong and from the open source ecosystem that we're both part of to be able to build really valuable products and really valuable companies. Thanks so much.
Everybody, thanks to Matt. All right, so to show you that we're serious about doubling down on GraphQL and working with Apollo, I'd like to talk about a very exciting development that we're going to release today, which is the Kong Apollo QuickStart Docker container. This is a Docker container that has both Kong proxy and the Apollo GraphQL server already networked and set up inside. The value prop of this is to be able to get you up and running with an out-of-the-box GraphQL server that's got the protection of a gateway in front of it so that you can deploy in just a matter of minutes. As you can see from the diagram here, there is not only a Kong and Apollo, but there's also a set of Node APIs that have been set up for you to mock against. So basically, they have the Star Wars GraphQL data in them for you to play around with. But the part I want to direct your attention to is the two files there that are replaceable. That is a schema and a resolver file for a GraphQL server that you can replace with your own schema and resolver files, bounce the container, and have a custom GraphQL server set up in just a couple of minutes. So let's go ahead and exercise that container a little bit with another offering that I'd like to show, which is a couple of enterprise plugins that we've built into Kong to help you with your transition or your using of GraphQL. So the first one we're going to show here is the GraphQL cache test. So caching is slightly difficult and different in GraphQL than it is in regular RESTful interfaces, which usually cache based off of URLs. GraphQL, same URL with a different query, can actually end up returning completely different results. So understanding how to cache this is a little bit more complex, and we've built a plugin to help you out with that. As you can see, we can make some requests to this backend, and you can tell that we've got a cache miss in the X header that we see there. But subsequent requests are significantly faster and also end up having a cache hit header to tell you that you're using the cache. The next challenge inside of using GraphQL sometimes is the fact that rate limiting GraphQL is a little bit different than rate limiting regular web requests. What you may or may not know is that a single request to a GraphQL server can result in multiple upstream queries, not only to RESTful backends, but also to possibly databases or other systems. And so one single request can result in fanning out into multiple systems. All that data has to be coalesced and then returned to the client. To that end, we've created the GraphQL cost plugin. The value prop here is that you can assign weights to different GraphQL queries that you have in your system so that you can rate limit them according to the load on your backend systems. As you see here, if we make a request for the old user 20 of the Star Wars data, you can see that we're able to get a response with headers that tell us what kind of rate limiting situation we're in. If we make several requests in quick succession, you'll see we start to get 429s and we start to get rate limited. And if we wait a second, we can go ahead and make a query again, and we're successful. So that is the GraphQL cost plugin. Finally, the last one I would like to show you, on your journey to either migrate to GraphQL or to use it for testing or mocking, you may end up in a situation where you have clients that still speak REST. But you also want to start rolling out your back-end GraphQL infrastructure so that you can start testing and using it. So in the spirit of migrations and that idea of being able to do a digital transformation, we've created the REST to GraphQL plugin, which allows you to make RESTful requests. As you can see in the URL up there, we're now querying the same GraphQL backend for user 10. However, you can see that the request comes back, not only is requested in a non-GraphQL format, but the data is returned to us in a more RESTful format so those clients can consume it the way that they're used to until you're ready to let them transition. And there you go. There's the new GraphQL support inside of Kong. So with that, we're leaving the pre-production portion of the full service lifecycle, and we're going to start looking into the post-production portion. You may have been here last year and saw us release the original version of Brain, which are assisted service management platform for auto documentation and auto visualization of your services. You may have seen the rudimentary service map that I showed you and saw it update. Well, I'd really like to show you today a much more updated, slick version that we're going to see some nifty tricks in a second. We're now back inside of Kong Manager, and we're going to click into the collector workspace. You can see we've generated some traffic here for you. And we can go up to the service map menu up in the top of the product, and you can see that we've now generated a nifty, zoomable service map. You can expand and contract nodes. You can zoom in and out. And you can also roll over the endpoints to get contextual data for the things that are configured inside of the service map. But what you probably didn't know is that Guanlon's been sending some gRPC traffic in the background, and we can also go into the service map and see a gRPC service map for a gRPC service that's been configured on Kong. And you can see we not only have the endpoint that we actually queried, this hello world endpoint, but we also automatically got the introspection endpoint as well. And the demo gods are not being kind. So this is service map with gRPC support inside of Kong Enterprise. So the second thing I'd like to show you in Kong Brain is how we've improved the CI/CD portion of how you use Brain. You may or may not have remembered that we can auto-generate OpenAPI specs from any traffic that's going over the Kong Enterprise platform, and we can generate new OpenAPI specs as your service changes and evolves in production. But what we've added this year is we've added the ability for you to customize the data that comes back in those OpenAPI files so that you can version and source control your files the way that you'd like with an automated CI/CD system. So as you can see, now you can not only slice and dice the specs by workspace, you can also slice and dice them by host, and you can start sending in metadata information like title, description, and version so that you can tie them into your Jenkins or backend CI/CD in a way that you can be alerted if a new version comes out that differs from the last version, and you can auto-update that version number and decide if you'd like to publish or if you'd like to have that be audited before it's published live to your systems. So giving you more flexibility in how you retrieve OpenAPI specs from Kong Brain. So with that, we finished one station on the post-production part of the wheel. I'd like to talk to the other portion of that wheel with Kong Immunity. So last year, we showed you the ability to generate a machine learning model from traffic on Kong so that you could see what was baseline acceptable traffic and usage behavior on your network. Generate a model based off of that traffic and usage, and then alert you to anomalies that are behavior patterns outside of that normal usage pattern. But what we got back from the field when we started having people use the product was that they liked the power of it, they liked the idea of it, but it was really hard for them to grasp it unless it was graphically represented. So what I'd like to show you today is the graphical alerts UI on top of Immunity. If we go back into the Kong Manager, go and drop into the collector workspace, and we go to the alerts section of the menu, you can see that we have a full-fledged UI for the alerts that have been created by and generated by Immunity. I'd like to direct you to all the filtering that's available up at the top. You can filter by severity. You can filter by type of alert. And you can also filter about whether or not it's been a resolved alert or an unresolved alert, so you can only look at the things that you care about. You also are going to be, in the very near future, able to ignore alerts in this list so that you can shape the things that you're interested in hearing about and not see the things that you don't want to see in the future. So that is the graphical UI for Immunity in Kong Enterprise. Now, there's one last thing that I want to show you that I think is going to be the most exciting part, which is the power of these things actually isn't in each one of the bits. It's actually being able to use them all together at the same time. So in the past, we saw the service map, and we also saw Immunity. But what I want to show you is the ability to do a full debug cycle through your services in production using Brain and Immunity and Vitals. So if we were to go back to the service map, you can see now that we have some alerts on the service map that will allow us to see values that have showed up that have, oops, we're going to wait a second here. It takes a little bit for the data to show up. What we're hoping to see here when we end up getting this is we'll end up getting some alerts in these endpoints that we'll be able to look at. So give us a sec here. Devo gods are not kind. Yeah, well. We'll see what we get here. So what you should be seeing is the ability to see icons that show up in the service map that will actually show you some alerts that you could click through into the service UI inside of, in the alerting UI inside of Immunity. And then you'd be able to click through and take a look at we'll just do it manually here. So if we go to that high value alert, we're able to click into the route here inside of the alert, and we're able to drop into the actual route that's actually having problems inside of the product, and you can start your debugging. What we're supposed to be able to see is alerts through service map, drop you into the alert UI, and then ultimately drop you into the route so that you can start debugging what's wrong with your service. So hopefully very soon you'll be able to play with the full debugging lifecycle of Brain and Immunity inside of Kong Enterprise. Thank you very much. So now, before I wrap up, I want to do a little teaser of some of the things that you're going to get to see tomorrow. I'll just call out some of the big ones, but we're going to talk a little bit about open source, and we're going to talk a little bit about enterprise. But the really exciting sort of highlights is I'm going to tease Go support for plugins in open source. It's going to be exciting. And we're also going to show some Kafka support inside of enterprise tomorrow. So make sure that you show up and check it out. All right, so to wrap up, transformations are successful when you're agnostic. It's okay to have a bunch of different tech in different states of migration. You're going to end up running new things, and you're going to have to maintain some of the old things. And that three-headed dragon that we talked about was the head of language and protocol. You're going to have multiple, and your solution should be able to handle it too. You're going to be deploying on multiple platforms, and that's okay. You should use the best platform and the best deployment method for the job. And you're likely going to have multi-cloud, and that's okay. So what I really hope to leave you with here is the idea that the way that you power connections that matter is with BOT, B-Y-O-T. Have a good conference. Thank you very much.